Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I'm Daniel McAdams of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Dr. Paul is away today, so I'll be taking the helm. Today we're going to discuss the Hollywoodization of war, whether Hollywood shapes our perceptions of war and conflict and may in fact help feed the increasing militarism in American society. We're joined today by Phil Giraldi, who was a longtime CIA intelligence officer with expertise in the Middle East and is now the executive director of the Council for the National Interest. Now, Phil, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Phil, you wrote a really incredible Memorial Day column for the UN's Review, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you here today. It's called Nazis on the Backlot, How Hollywood Has Changed Our Perception of War. And in the column, you started out talking about how there's a shifting perception of the price that's to be paid for war that's been shaped primarily by Hollywood and video games. Could you give us just a quick summary of what the article was about and your main points?
Well, basically, I talk about how the United States has, by virtue of being sheltered by two oceans, has always been protected from some of the worst consequences of war. Europeans, of course, remember very well the Second World War and the devastation it caused and the millions of people that were killed by it. The United States never experienced any of that. So our sole perception of war is what we see essentially on television or in the movies. And Hollywood has created this monster, which is essentially a video game type of war in which Americans are generally virtuous, that essentially they always win in one way or another, and that the devastating damage that many other people in the world are very much aware of is kind of excluded from the depiction. So when Americans say they support boots on the ground or kinetic action in various places, they're actually quite ignorant of what all this stuff means. It means getting your head blown off, and your house getting blown up. And we don't quite understand that.
But Hollywood has always been sort of hand in glove with the government and the war machine. Going back to Frank Capra, who was paid by the U.S. government to get Americans excited about fighting World War II. But do you see a change in how Hollywood portrays war now? Do you think it's getting worse now, and how so?
Well, I think it's getting worse because one of the other things I said in my article is that up until 1973, there was a draft. So that many people coming from, working middle-class families in the United States had very direct knowledge of at least some of the horrors of war. This has kind of vanished as I'm no proponent of the draft, absolutely not. But the fact is that the draft did create a certain awareness among a broader population of some of the very bad things about military service in general and about war in particular. This has vanished. Something less than 2% of Americans have any exposure to the military, and essentially 98% of the population, insofar as they understand war at all, get it through, as I noted, video games and from Hollywood.
There seems to be an inverse relationship between the actual experience Americans have with war and their willingness or interest in lionizing war and in celebrating militarizing holidays such as the Memorial Day holiday and such. I noticed before we came on, you talk about video games and the Call of Duty franchise, which is, I guess, the largest of these military games that they play on TV. 175 million copies sold at a cost of $10 billion in revenues. That seems absolutely incredible. And do you think these young people, once they get a taste for war on their computers or TVs, are they running off to meet with their recruiters, or is this sort of does it satisfy their interest in playing these pretend games?
Well, in a way, I guess it's just a venting of aggression. But at the same time, strangely enough, of course, the military has itself adopted certain tropes from the games. The guys who blow up wedding parties in Afghanistan sit in an air-conditioned suite in Nevada. So it's interesting how these things play on each other. My problem with all of this, of course, is it trivializes what getting killed or what two nations going at each other in an attempt to destroy each other really means. And this, of course, does translate into a broad public perception that really war is not that bad.
Yes. You mentioned about Hollywood, but looking at the comments to your article, comments in many ways are as interesting as the articles themselves, because it really gives you a sense of what people are thinking when they read what you've written, and you probably feel that way yourself. But some of the comments I found enlightening dealt with, well, what about the news media? Does it not also trivialize war? It doesn't show people being burned alive in eastern Ukraine or wedding parties being bombed. Do you think they're complicit in this sugarcoating of war?
Yeah, I think they are, and probably one could argue that every war movie ever made by any country is basically propaganda that tries to show war in a certain way. But what is particularly disturbing in the American experience, I think, is that the war is kind of painless. It's like in a way nobody gets hurt. I mean, it's depicted in a way that doesn't allow the viewer to share the agony of people being killed, being burned alive. I mean, when we firebombed Tokyo, we killed, 140,000 people. What is that experience like? Is there ever going to be a Hollywood depiction of it? When we bombed Dresden, we killed 50,000 people. Hamburg, I think, was 40,000. And so we have this kind of I don't know, a war that's not really a war. You can't see the people screaming. You can't see them dying. So when some idiot like Ted Cruz talks about boots on the ground and putting soldiers in Syria, he doesn't see all the dead bodies. He doesn't care about the dead bodies. It's not within his realm of thought. And this is what disturbs me. Too many Americans, when they're asked about their willingness to pursue more military pursuits in the Middle East and in Asia and Africa, really don't have a clear perception of what they're talking about.
I noticed also the bravado of the generals on channels like CNN. They come on and they bluster about how easy it's going to be. You just got to move a few thousand troops here and there. A lot of them are on the payroll of the different think tanks in the Beltway. And one of the things you mentioned in your article was that no one benefited from the Iraq War and the surge except for the defense contractors. But as you know very, very well, Phil, most of these think tanks that come up with these wonderful policy ideas, if you look at where their contributions come from, for example, the Institute for the Study of War, Kimberly Kagan's outfit, it's to the person, or to the corporation, the same people who are making a fortune off of the wars, and they can lavishly pay these generals to pontificate about how easy it's going to be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Follow the money is always a good rule. And these people are funded, essentially. They have very good livings, very good jobs. They appear on television a lot more frequently than you and I do. And these people benefit greatly from their connection with the war industry. And I would see this as a serious issue, that we have a lot of bottom feeders who are actually feeding the system and feeding the system to create this tolerance for war. And I would also add your comment about the generals. We have generals that themselves have never experienced combat. General Petraeus, who was billed by the Kagans, of course, as the new Napoleon, in effect. He was never in combat in his whole career. Here was a four-star general who never experienced combat personally, and yet, he's held up as an example of how to do it. I mean, this is quite ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Phil, going back to the comments, I wanted to switch gears just slightly, because something else struck me that I've often thought about, and that is how perplexed, at least in my perception, the rest of the world is about U.S. foreign policy. They don't seem to understand what are the goals, what do they want to do, where do they go next. I remember probably 10 or 12 years ago, a friend of mine was the Belarusian ambassador in Washington, and he had, I think, watched one of Bush's State of the Union speeches, And he said, I sat there thinking, just tell us what you want us to do. We'll do it. You know, they couldn't figure out. They're ready to be compliant, but they have no idea what Washington wants. And one of the comments under your article was from a person who identified as a non-American. And he or she said she finds it difficult to understand the mindset of the American people. They maintain a gigantic and enormously costly military. They send their soldiers to die and kill in large amounts on countries on the other side of the world, yet the public somehow believes it's all necessary to defend their freedoms. It's very interesting how confusing it is. Do you think, I mean, in your experience, the rest of the world is as confused as you and I are about this?
Well, the rest of the world, again, has a much better perception of what war entails. And that's part of the problem. And I think there's a huge gap between literally the rest of the world and the United States in terms of how they perceive military advantage and how they perceive going to war. And this is the really dangerous bit about it, because we actually have a country that's out of sync with the rest of the world in terms of not seeing the military as our Constitution stipulates, as a mechanism to defend the country. We're seeing it as a tool for foreign policy. And for other countries, this is just incomprehensible. Why are you doing this? Why are you engaging in this? Why are you rationalizing this to state the belief that this is something that is a reasonable policy? Because it's not.
Yes. And I think you answered the question in your piece, which is the reason it's being done in the U.S. is because people are completely unaware of the real costs of war. You mentioned, I'd like to close with something that you mentioned in the piece that I thought was very powerful. You said, my point is when Americans think of war, they think of something heroic and relatively painless, unless you're somehow electrocuted by your PlayStation. So I think, we have to fight not only war, but war propaganda, which we see everywhere. And that's what we try to do here on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Phil, I want to thank you very much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to talk to you and gain some of your expertise. I want to thank all of our viewers out there for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Please share our videos if you like them with your friends and your family and even your enemies. Continue to watch us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in.